Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining CEO of Solutions 2021's second session. My name is Ruba Nakirin, and I will be your moderator this evening for the session on innovations in sustainable packaging value chain. Let's kick off our session with a question related to our topic today. Members of the audience, you should see a question appearing on your screen right about now. We'll give you a minute to respond to the poll. The question is, what percentage of plastic produced annually gets recycled? We'll give it another 20 seconds. All right. The responses are in, and it seems like many of you in the audience today are optimists. Nothing wrong with that. We could stand to do with more of you in the world. The unfortunate truth is that only 9% gets recycled, while 12% gets incinerated, with 79% of it ending up in landfills or natural environment. When we talk about reducing plastic waste, the crux of the conversation centers around sustainable packaging. Here to shine the light on the future of sustainable packaging and the challenges and gap we're presently facing are 7 panelists, each an expert in their field. I'd like to invite the 4 panelists in our first round of today's fireside chat to introduce themselves and tell us about their work and experience. Let's start with Kirsten van Zandwijk, who is the Sustainability and Partnerships Director of the CocaCola Company for ASEAN and South Pacific based in Singapore. She is responsible for driving key partnerships in the region while integrating sustainability into the organization's business practices. Kirsten, over to you.
Thanks, Ruba. Thank you. And good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. I think people from different time zones. Very great to be here. I'm Kirsten. I am the Sustainability and Partnerships Director indeed for the Coca-Cola Company for the Southeast Asia and South Pacific region. And I'm based out of Singapore. And I actually moved from my home country, the Netherlands in Europe, to Singapore only 6 months ago. So I came here with my husband, our children, and our dog. And it has been a wonderful experience so far, being able to learn every day in a part of the world with some very serious sustainability challenges. So we obviously face a plastic pollution crisis, where we will talk about today, but the region is also very vulnerable for climate change. We are more and more concerned about people's health. So it's a privilege to be able to contribute to solutions and to be part of this part of the world with a true hands-on mentality and a true belief that only partnership helps us forward. So great to be here, great initiative. I think as a person, I've always been mission-driven in everything I do. So prior to moving to the Coca-Cola Company, I've been working for NGOs for almost 10 years. Prior to Coke, I worked for UNICEF, the UN's children's organization, and I was responsible for the corporate partnerships. So I worked together with companies like IKEA, Unilever, Procter & Gamble. And then really, it was in an early stage of my career, and it really made me realize that businesses have a very important role to play as well in order to solve some of the biggest environmental and social issues globally. So that belief, but also my personal curiosity and ambition made me move from the nonprofit sector to the profit sector to Coca-Cola 6 years ago. So I joined Coke in my home country, the Netherlands. And what I've seen over the last couple of 6 years I'm with this company is that we rapidly increased our focus on sustainability. While it isn't new to us as a company, I think we've always been focused on being a force for good. And we've always wanted to do business the right way and do that responsibly. We really are now focused at the front line. So sustainability is fully integrated in everything we do as a business. And I think that's a position where we should be, right? So we are a big company. We have a leadership role to play. We have a big footprint, also in a negative way. So it's really important that we take that responsibility. So as said, we're positioned at the front line. And I think for companies like the Coca-Cola company, it's often not about the license to operate, but it's really about that license to lead. So we're simply expected to do more. So today we will talk about plastic and plastic packaging, but obviously we are also very dedicated to deliver progress against our climate and water, sugar reduction plans, as well as our community resilience and disaster relief programs. This is highly endorsed by the full company. So as said, a privilege to be able to dedicate my full work week every day to this topic. And I really appreciate to be here today with like-minded people. So everyone that's committed to play its part to solve this global crisis. So thank you again for inviting me and being part of this panel today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kirsten. And I'm sure, like myself, the audience are looking forward to hearing more about how, Coca-Cola has been, taking the license to lead sustainability as part of your organization. Now, let's welcome our second panelist, Dr. Visu Chetiappan, Professor of Environmental Engineering and Management Program at the ASEAN Institute of Technology's School of Environment, Resources and Development. Professor Visu, as he is more commonly known, has more than 30 years of experience teaching environmental engineering and management-related courses at AIT, and is among the top 1% of scientists in a global list compiled by Stanford University last year. Prof. Visu, could you tell us about the work that's related to today's conversation that you have been performing at AIT?
Okay, thank you very much, Rupa. Thanks a lot once again for this excellent introduction, so I don't have to say too much. Basically, I'm from Sri Lanka. I'm working in Thailand for the last 35 years. I'm basically a chemical engineer from Indian Institute of Technology, Madras in India. So I was trained more like a polymer chemistry or polymer engineering as part of my undergraduate program. Later onwards, I was converted to a hardcore environmental engineer. So currently, I'm dealing with a professional master's program on marine plastic abatement. This is a professional master's program financially supported by Japanese government. We are conducting this program at AIT for the last 3 batches. We have been training more than 100 young professionals under this program. They're coming from Asia, Africa, even from Latin America. So this is what we are doing at AIT as this part of this plastic waste management. It's also, I'm involved in teaching a full-fledged course on circular economy on plastic waste management, where in this course, I deal with from linear economy to a circular economy, where I look at it, the 8 different main components of circular economy, which involves around design for sustainability, cleaner production, reverse logistics, industrial ecology, waste management, and finally up to product as a service. So as part of the design for sustainability, and we look into a lot of innovations in plastic waste management. So I'm going to sort of in this particular forum, I like to focus on how we need to do an innovations and how the innovation has to be looked at an integrated approach rather than individual approach, and especially on a plastic supply chain. Many of the innovations are taking place on an individualistic approach, where I'm going to emphasize why and how to do an integrated approach. So finally, I'm being in a generation when the my birth and plastic births were almost at the same year. So I consider that plastic is a miracle product, a very good product. I made use of it for the last 60 years, and I find nothing wrong with plastic. That is my point as a chemical engineer. Now, when I take my hat as an environmental engineer, I feel we always complain about plastic pollution, but I feel the solution should be not blaming the plastic. How do you develop an integrated system? Okay, this is where is a problem. The plastic waste management is an issue, not the plastic issues. And that is where I like to emphasize the innovation has to come onto this point of view. And I hope we'll have a fruitful discussion. Okay, thank you, Rupa.
Thank you, Prof, for giving us a glimpse into the amazing work that you've been carrying out. And we're looking forward to hear more about the integrated approach that I'm sure you'll be running us through later. Our next panelist is Tana Sullivan, Head of Sustainability at GoTo Group. Tana is based in Jakarta and has been accelerating the holding company's sustainability function and expanding its environmental and social efforts. Tana, the virtual floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Ruba, and what a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited about the discussion we're going to have today. Look, I think that my role at GoTo is really about managing the environmental and social impacts and efforts that we undertake as a company. It covers 3 companies, actually: Gojek, GoTo Financial, and Tokopedia. So together, our combination collectively, we make the biggest and largest tech company in Indonesia and one of the largest in the ASEAN region. Our reach is incredible. We have millions and millions of users, around 11 million micro SMEs and merchants who work on our platform, and a few million driver partners as well. So you can imagine that in monitoring and trying to reduce our environmental impact and trying to strategically improve our social impact as well, it's a pretty big task. But I'm very fortunate that I get to work with very forward-thinking leaders who are very much on board with shifting the way that we do business so that we can be accountable and transparent about our environmental and social impact and targets and progress, and very much about transitioning the way that we do business. So it's just not business as usual for us. So it's a very exciting time to be here in this company, in this country, and in this region, I think, and especially as sustainability becomes more and more mainstream part of businesses and governments' discussions and thinking and planning and policies.
Great, thank you, Tana. It looks like the approach taken by Gojek, GoTo, and Tokopedia is quite a holistic one, and we're looking forward to hearing more about it. So the next panelist for our first fireside chat today is Mathias Philipson, CEO of Swedish Plastic Recycling, Europe's largest and most efficient plant for recycling of plastic packaging, with a capacity to handle packaging from all Swedish households. Mathias, do tell us about yourself and about the revolutionary work done by Swedish Plastic Recycling.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very excited to be part of this event. Like you said, my name is Mathias Philipson. I'm CEO of Swedish Plastic Recycling. The company is owned basically by the Swedish Business Society, and the purpose of the company is to collect and recycle all plastic packaging from Swedish households. I'm also a member of the delegation for circular economy. I was appointed by the Swedish government in order to give advice and suggestions to the Swedish government in order to faster turn the Swedish society into a circular economy. One of my key missions is basically to turn plastics into the circular economy. This is what my feeling is what is lacking today. Like many others already said, there's nothing bad about plastics in itself. It's quite clever material that can be actually used in order to fight some of the climate challenges. But we need really to make it part of the circular economy. One of the biggest key aspects of this is that we need to have capacity. We need to have a good innovative technology. And we are planning to build a new facility that is called Site Zero. Site Zero will have the capacity to treat 200,000 annual tons. That is basically all plastic packaging from Swedish households. This plant will be able to recycle all those plastic packaging, and most important maybe, it will also be able to do this without climate impact. And from my perspective, this is one of the key issues. You can recycle almost everything, but you need to do it without climate impact. Otherwise, it doesn't really have a meaning. So basically, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mathias. That is truly a remarkable feat to recycle without any climate impact. With that, let's get straight to our fireside chat with our panelists. So let's have Kirsten, Tana, Mathias, as well as Prof Visu. All right. So the first question for the panel is this. Demand for online food delivery service has grown exponentially. And as a result, there have been calls for food delivery service providers to take greater accountability in curbing single-use plastic waste. Where should majority of the responsibility reside? Is it with food delivery services providers, or restaurant owners, or consumers? Or should government enact better regulations to ensure responsibility is shared amongst these groups?
Maybe I can jump in first, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
So within, just for everyone's reference, within GoTo Group, we have Gojek, and Gojek operates GoFood. This is the food delivery business. It's one of the biggest food delivery platforms in the country. And with almost 300 million people and lots of orders happening every day, that's a lot of waste that's potentially generated from the packaging that comes with the food delivery. So we at Gojek, we've been looking at this for the last 12 months in terms of testing out different kinds of material that will replace single-use packaging and plastic packaging. Right now, we're still very much in our infancy in terms of testing a solution that will actually make sense for our merchants, because recalling that we have millions of merchants, and most of them, almost 80% of them, 90% of them are ultra/micro SMEs, meaning that they are mom and pop restaurants and food and beverage outlets across the country, not big franchises with a lot of capital to spend on testing and new or alternative material packaging. So for us, it's really about finding a solution that is cost effective, where the cost does not have to be borne by the merchant themselves, but rather we can somehow find a way to shift it down the value chain in a way. And so for us, it's really right now investing, because of the size that we are, being able to invest in doing the due diligence, stress testing a lot of this packaging. There are a lot of green packaging around in the market, but for us, it's making sure that it's actually sustainable alternatives to single-use or plastic packaging. There's also, of course, reusable packaging as well, but this becomes particularly complex in a market like Indonesia, where the infrastructure isn't necessarily set up just yet. But that's why it's so important for us to work with a lot of the partners that we work with across government, across other private corporates, in private sector, and also some of the really exciting and innovative startups who are offering incredibly high potential solutions. And of course, for us, once those solutions have gone through kind of the screening and due diligence, we're so excited to kind of scale some of these solutions on our platform and provide those options to merchants. And then by default, of course, then consumers who are ordering the food from the merchants through our platform.
Great. Thanks, Tana. And it's great to know that, especially at at GoTo and Gojek and Tokopedia that you're trying to shift the burden away from your merchants, most of which, as you mentioned, are made of SMEs. So it's great to know that. Prof Visu, would you like to chime in on this question?
Yeah, I like to, let me take sort of 5 minutes, sort of give my views on this. See, there are 4 stakeholders: government, consumer, and the provider, here it's a restaurant, and the service providers, food delivery. Okay, there are 4 stakeholders who should be responsible. Please understand, all the 4 are responsible, I consider. They have to work in a coordinated approach. You cannot say it's responsibility be one side or another. That's the first thing. But moreover, for practical reasons, I feel the food delivery and the restaurants should take sort of a leading role in something. And I'll give you some examples how things are happening. Okay. Second thing, on these particular questions, when it comes to plastic waste, you need to consider 2 scenarios: before COVID and post-COVID, or the current situation. Pre-COVID period, things were much better. But the problem is the last 2 years, called the COVID period, has increased the food delivery and the plastic, and it has become practically a norm. We had very good, excellent, good practices pre-COVID era. And all those things are destroyed, especially on the food sectors, during this pandemic period. Because before COVID, we used to use it packaging as a safety issue of our food. But today, a packaging, especially plastic, plays a role. It's not only a food safety, it's also hygiene comes. So because of this hygiene issue, we start consuming more and more plastic. That's an issue now. Now, I'll say the government, for example, should play a certain role. I'll give you an example. Some policy statements, it's in some countries, like in Thailand, we say polystyrene packaging should not be used in food containers. It's very important, because the polystyrene cannot be recycled effectively. So the government should play, and that the food sector should take into this consideration. Yes, it works out very well, should look at that. So the policies should come first, and that be taken over by producers. But policy alone will not work. Very often government puts a policy, but we don't have alternative packaging system. So they have to work hand in hand. So it's very careful. There are a lot of examples where the policies comes first without an alternative solutions. Second thing, on the food sector, I'll come back into again. We used to use quite a lot of multi-layer packaging, and that can be replaced today by innovation. A single layer packaging becomes very attractive. These are very innovative solutions, because we know multi-layer packaging cannot be recycled versus single layer are much easier to recycle. So these are the things can happen here. Now, when you look at it, when I order a food, I get a big menu card of food variety, but I don't get a menu card of packaging options. So it is important the restaurants should provide a packaging options. I should be able to pay a little bit more, okay, or reusable packaging, or I could have an options of not taking the plastic cutleries, so that I should get some benefit. So it's important the restaurants should start working on not only giving the menu of the food, the menu of packaging has to come, where the options is given. If you're a green consumer, then you might be interesting to sort these issues. So maybe you should look into that. Totally different thinking, innovation should come. Okay, and there are a lot of green consumers. People are educated. People understand that, especially if you afford to pay for a food on delivery system, you are willing to pay a little bit more and trying to be. We are what do you call it, at least in the middle level of a society. So you could take some extra load and consciousness to reduce the plastic, but you should give a menu card. You should give that option. Okay, that is very important, and that is where the food delivery and the food restaurants should work together. How do you get recyclable or reusable packaging can be utilized, and etc. I throw you some innovation ideas. They're quite successful here. For example, edible packaging is seen to be a very sustainable food packaging. Okay, so it's been happening right now. For instance, seaweed-based ho-ho, okay, a capsule containing liquid things have been happening. So there are a lot of restaurants, especially in UK, 65 London restaurants use this type of food delivery packages, which you can just eat it directly, so you don't need it. So there are innovations are coming up where edible packaging is coming up. So this need, so these are the things I consider is okay. Second thing, when you're talking about labeling, and today in many food sectors, laser-based labeling is happening. Okay, that's things taking place. So it's becoming very, very attractive. So we can make it much more easier. Okay. Third one is, as I told you, from multi-layer to a single-layer packaging, and it's also see in the food sector refilling vending machines. I think I'm sure that somebody will discuss a little bit more. Industry sector can talk about it. Refilling vending machines are coming up quite successfully. There's one company called Algroma 13, which I think in Chile, they are being a very successful company where people can go for this type of alternatives. I think we had a webinar a few months ago, and we had a very interesting participation from Singapore, and they have indicated this. In Singapore, there are 3 main food delivery companies: Food Panda, Deliveroo, and Grab Food. They have partnered together to food container sharing services. Bareback, and I think there's another company, to offer customers to opt for reusable food containers. So you can see, you can partnership somebody who has these food containers which are reusable, fit the service providers, and these sort of initiatives have been taking place, but it's a very small scale at the moment, but it has to be expanded. And these are the things. And lastly, in Canada, Hillman, I think, and a Unilever brand uses 100% post-consumer recycled plastic, okay, rPET, okay, recycled PET, okay, in all its food, especially mayonnaise bottles, okay. So you can see the industry start looking into this, how recycling can come into the food sectors, etc. So innovativeness provides a lot of examples. I think this is where I think the innovativeness can come into the food sector. Thank you. I'll stop at this point. Thanks.
Thanks, Prof Visu. That was definitely a very insightful response, and it's quite interesting to see what are some of the innovations that are being practiced around the world. Yeah. So my next question is for Kirsten. Despite rolling out bottles made from 100% recycled plastic materials earlier this year in the US, CocaCola has been identified as the biggest plastic polluter last month by Brand Audit. Now, how is CocaCola trying to rapidly shift its packaging value chain to become more sustainable?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Ruba. And it's great that we are referring to the Hellmann's example a lot as well, and we're doing actually the same with our bottles, not only in the US, by the way. So that indeed has been rolled out quite recently, but we were actually earlier in Europe and in this part of the world, in some Asian countries as well as Australia, with moving into 100% recycled PET bottles in, for example, the Philippines, Vietnam, and also Australia. So great examples, I think, of how you can close the loop. So you can actually really create closed loop bottles in order to lower your carbon footprint, because a bottle made of recycled plastic has a lower carbon footprint than a bottle made of completely virgin, so new plastic. And at the same time, you're increasing the demand for recycled plastic, which is increasing the demand for collection. And that's how we sometimes call it the pull effect, right? So that's a really important element in our strategy, because we obviously have a huge problem and we have a responsibility to play there. But in some countries, and it also applies to some countries in the market where I'm active, only pooling, so only, let's say, buying recycled content instead of new content, so instead of new plastic, isn't enough or isn't simply the first option you have because, for example, there's no legislation in place to use recycled plastic for food grade packaging, or there's simply not enough recycled material available in the country because there's not a well-established waste infrastructure in place. So before we get there, so before we can move into circular bottles, we have to do a lot of other things, and we have to do that in partnership with others. So that means in this region or in other parts of the world that we, for example, invest in recycling facilities. We sometimes even build the recycling facilities. We have one in the Philippines opening up early next year, and also similar plans in Australia, for example, in Indonesia, where we actually create recycling facilities. But it also means partnering with government and industry partners in getting the legislation in place, making sure that we can use recycled content in order to create a circular system for food packaging. And all these efforts over the last couple of years resulted in, specifically in Asia, in the fact that we are able to launch the 100% recycled plastic bottles next year in many more countries. So that's really exciting. And yeah, I think a great milestone and a result of the work that we've been doing in partnership with others. I think your question also referred to brand audit, and I don't know the details of that research, but I think it's an NGO that organizes major cleanups worldwide. They collect, let's say, all the litter, and they, let's say, count which brands they find. And we know often it has the Coca-Cola brand name on it. Also a lot of litter with our competitor's name on it, but maybe the majority without any name on it, right? So not traceable at all, and it's all not okay. So it's not okay whether it has our name on it or whether it's untraceable plastic. But having said that, being such a big brand with having such a big reputation and high visibility, it makes us a target. So we are absolutely often the center of campaigns, for example, or being mentioned in documentaries that don't leave a lot of room for nuance. But at the same time, that's a good thing because I think nuance also leads into vagueness around responsibilities. So that pressure, and that's again bringing me, I think, to that point on the license to lead, feeling that pressure and being such a visible part of the problem also makes us more aware every day that we have a responsibility to play. And I think we realized a couple of years ago that being such a big brand, with having such a big stage, basically, also brings in opportunities. So in Southeast Asia and also in other parts of the world, we started using the labels we have on our bottles to start communicating with our consumers about what they can do to help us recycle. So please don't litter and help us recycle is something that we simply printed on all of our labels and caps in order to repeatedly address this message that everyone has a role to play, and we really need our consumers as well in order to help us. And it's not a single solution, obviously. And you need to do it right in order to avoid the frame of greenwashing or have to do it wrong. But it's a perfect, let's say, add-on on all the work we're doing behind the scenes in order to make sure that we increase collection and recycling facilities in the markets. So let me end there. Being a big brand is sometimes not easy because you're a big target as well. But at the same time, we really turn it into opportunities. And I think that's something that other brands like Hellmann's and Unilever has many great examples are also doing the right way. That's it.
Thank you for that, Kristen. I'll jump right into the next question, which is, paper is a favorable substitute. However, the water footprint in cultivating crops used to make paper is extremely high. Are alternatives to plastic packaging indeed sustainable? Tana, would you like to take that on?
Sure. I mean, look, I think from my perspective, there's no silver bullet to this, at least in all the research and scoping and assessment that we've done. And I think the fact that we don't have a silver bullet solution that's going to appease all aspects of the kind of solution that we're looking for. We need to start somewhere. and anywhere's got to be better than where we are right now, while we wait for something that does come to market that is scalable, that is cost effective, that is accessible, and especially in an emerging market as complex as Indonesia is. And so for us, we are doing our due diligence, as I mentioned earlier, with everything that comes our way, with everything we find here in Indonesia and across the region. We are stress testing and working very closely with those who own those the solutions themselves to make sure that it is something that's going to make sense for our ecosystem as well. Because again, for us, ultimately, it's about providing our many merchants and our users as well the diversity of options, so that they're not just stuck with whatever it is that's that has been historically in place, which is, of course, what we know, the cheapest, most affordable, and in times of the pandemic, as the professor mentioned, most hygienic as well. And so I think for us, yes, there with every possible solution, there is always something to further explore, further investigate, further refine, or iterate upon. But for us, it's we're a tech company. We started off by just starting somewhere, anywhere. It's actually our company kind of mission statement. So for us, it's we're willing to try anything so long as it's better than where we are today, the status quo. And again, working very, very closely with those partners, both upstream and downstream, across our ecosystem, to make sure that whatever we do offer as alternatives does kind of take all the main boxes that we have, so that our ecosystem can adopt it and then scale it incredibly far and wide in this country and in this region.
Thank you. Prof Visu, over to you.
Yeah, Rupa, maybe the question you're asking is compare between a plastic cup with a paper cup. What is the best one? Obviously, you need to look at the life cycle analysis, and you have to look at the whole supply chain. And as I said at the beginning, in many cases, I feel plastic is the winner. Okay, very honestly. Okay, there's nothing wrong with the plastic. The issue is the managing the waste is the plastic is the issue. So if you have an alternative material, you cannot say this is better than plastic or worse than plastic. It is case by case unless you look at the whole cycle. So the second part is what I'm interested. What are the elements companies like a CocaCola or any brand must consider when you are designing a sustainable packaging material for their goods? Okay, that is why I like to answer. When you talk about alternative, we are talking about innovations. Basically, innovations can come up at three levels. One, it could be a material innovation, okay, plastic to biodegradable plastic or different products. There are a lot of things that are happening on material innovation. Then you can also talk about plastic as a business innovation. Okay, it's one of the circular economy, let's say, products selling as a service. There are a lot of example packaging, say, for example, renting, leasing, and you can talk about business innovation. Third one is that technological innovations is very important. Let's say, for example, plastic plays a very important role, technological innovation. So today, if you go to construction industry, many of the wood are replaced with plastic. So you can see the technology of plastic need is improving more and more. So the technological innovations are taking place strongly on the thing. What is important here is many of the brands, okay, they stand in the supply chain and they look at their particular product. Look at bioplastic bag is one classic example. It's a nice product and we know it's composting, but it composts in a certain condition, a certain temperature. So if you ask a conventional municipal solid waste management group, which has a composting plant, they will not like to have this biodegradable plastic because they have a lot of operational problems. So what is important here is, in terms of innovation, the brands, please don't look at your innovations on a single eye. Please look at the whole system. Your innovation could create a big problem, somebody in the down the supply chain, okay, and that could create a bigger problem. I think that is a recommendation I like to make with these short minutes. Thanks, Rupa.
Thank you, Prof Visu. All right, so let's go to the last question for this fireside chat, which is for Mathias. Mathias, Swedish plastic recycling has the capacity today to manage 4 different types of plastic, with plans in the future to extend that number to 12 different types. How is technology making this possible?
Well, to start with, I think it's very important that once you actually collected the plastics, you have 2 options. This is a major issue. Either you separate each plastic fraction and recycle them. And the good example I think everybody is familiar with, this is a PET bottle. You can basically recycle it over and over and over again, just because it's been separated, not mixed with other types of plastics. This is extremely important. This is a good example of circular recycling. I can also, as a recycler, do this. This is actually a railway sleeper containing of mixed plastics. As you can see here are PET bottles. PP, it's HDPE, LDPE, etc., etc. This counts as recycling as much as this one. And this is not very clever, because this one creates as much climate impact as I would have incinerated everything. While this one is dramatically decreasing climate impact. So what we are trying to do with our plant is that currently we are sorting out, as you mentioned, 4 different types of plastics. I was told that I can sort out many more, but there's no market for it. But they were wrong. So we are being able to sort out now 12 different fractions, and we found customers for them, so they can recycle each of those 12 fractions. So the plant we are now beginning to construct will be able to sort and recycle a lot of more plastics the right way, the circular way. This is extremely important. At the same time, as I mentioned to you, it doesn't make any sense to recycle if you don't connect it with climate impact. So we are presenting our climate impact from the whole collection and recycling system to our customers in order for them to understand, all right, my packaging is creating this climate impact. And this is, I think, from the industry, very important to be able to more help our customers to become more competitive. Because if they do the right choices in design for recycling, they will be awarded by decreasing their climate impact. So there's a lot of things to, but I think I will stop there because I said the important part so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Mathias, in highlighting the importance in designing plastic that is recyclable. Now we've got questions coming in from the audience, so let's respond to those. The first one is for Tana, which is the question is, GoTo integrates several million drivers into your supply chain. Most drivers are consuming at least 2 liters per day, and most of them from single-use plastic bottles. Are you open to innovative solution that would eliminate single-use plastic bottles?
So first, I do have to caveat that with we've never tracked what our driver partners consume in terms of water intake. But I mean, this is such an individual, this is a personal thing, right? And whether they're using plastic bottles or refillable bottles. That said, I mean, for us, as I mentioned earlier, we're very, very open to working with, collaborating, testing, piloting, all the things that you would find natural about a tech company, sandboxing some of these solutions if they can replace single-use plastic in our ecosystem. Again, it comes back to the very crux of what I said before, which is whatever we come up with, especially as it relates to some of the finding alternatives for kind of business as usual operations, it has to make sense for our ecosystem, not just for us as a company. meaning that it has to be cost effective. It has to be truly sustainable. And it has to be something that will actually contribute to the targets that we set for ourselves as it relates to whether today we're talking about zero waste, but also in terms of our ambitions to become a net zero platform, right, by 2030. So I think for us, it's kind of those main boxes need to be checked. And that's why we're so stringent in terms of our screening with the partners that we do work with. I hope that answers the question. In short, yes, we're very, very much open to any innovative solution, but there is a lot of due diligence that goes into it beforehand as a forewarning. And I think rightly so. We don't want to be opening ourselves or any of our partners up to potential scrutiny on this. And we want to make sure that, we're in it for the long haul, and we want to come up with something that's meaningful, credible, and also scalable for our ecosystem and the many, many stakeholders that are in it.
Thank you, Tana. It's definitely a complex issue. So I don't believe that there's an easy solution to it, and it's good that you're taking into consideration a lot of due diligence in the process. All right, I think we've got time for just one more question before we end the first fireside chat for today, which is so this question is for Kirsten. Coca-Cola has made a great pledge to use 50% of recycled material in all packaging in the next few years. What kind of systems are you planning to use to control and verify this? And how do you plan to manage this goal in countries like China, where recycled content is not allowed in food packaging?
It's a very good question, and happy to hear that someone is aware of the details of our commitments. So indeed, the Coca-Cola Company has made a global strategy around sustainable packaging, and we want to collect and recycle 100% of the bottles and cans that we put on the market by 2030. And we want indeed use at least 50% recycled content in all of our bottles and cans. And it's an ambitious plan, but it is definitely feasible. But one of the first things we realized, I think, is that it doesn't make sense to work in silos, right? We cannot solve this issue alone. We have to collaborate with partners, with governments, and with the wider industry to help us scale this program. Having said that, the use of recycled material in our bottles is indeed not even allowed in some of our markets. Thailand is another example, but I think we're almost there. So how do we work with our competitors, let's say the industry partners, in order to collaborate with government, in order to create the right legislation? Because our experience is that it's often not that there's no willingness to do that. It's simply not in place because you see this is rapidly evolving. So we've been successful, absolutely successful in that one. And how to get access to recycled material is another really good question. What we do, and I think I mentioned it in my previous example as well, we actually start joint ventures with recycling facilities. So we will open one in the Philippines early next year, so within a couple of months actually. That gives us direct access to recycled material, but also something that we share with competition, right? So we produce more recycled content that we can use in our bottles. So we also sell it to other brands that want to use more recycled content. We're planning to do the same in Australia and in Indonesia within our region. So apart from joint ventures and actually investing in recycling facilities, we also directly contract with recycling facilities. Being a big brand, and I think it applies to all food and beverage companies, we have really high standards in terms of making sure that the material we use is verified. But having said that, it's indeed not easy. We call it the pool effect. So we made that commitment of 50%, knowing that it was going to be a challenge, but we're working on it every day, and it starts often with collection, so making sure that we increase the available amount of material to recycle and to bring back into a new bottle. I hope it answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Kirsten. And that's definitely a fantastic pledge, and I'm really hoping that it gets accomplished thoroughly in the future. Thank you so much again to Kirsten, Prof Visu, Tana, and Mathias for sharing with us your valuable insights. Let's move on to our next fireside chat with our three panelists. All right. First up, we've got Martin Tickner, Head of Project Sourcing and Development at Alliance to End Plastic Waste. With over 40 years of experience in the petrochemical industry, Martin is now on a journey to solve the challenge of plastic waste. Martin, over to you.
Very good. Thank you, Ruba, and good morning, afternoon, and evening to everybody. Really great to be at this event, even if by remote participation, because last time I was here, it was in person. So, yeah, as Ruba said, I'm the Chief Advisor of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste for Circular Solutions. And in that, the role that I have is translating the strategy of the Alliance and the roadmap for endeavouring to end plastic waste into the types of the projects that we want to support, which we then select those projects, develop them, and then secure the funding for such projects. So, indeed, my experience coming from the petrochemical industry, in which I had a variety of different roles, manufacturing, innovation, business management, major projects execution, and also strategy across all the major regions of the world. And coming to the Alliance, it was really with the ambition to use that experience in tackling what I think is an extraordinarily complex issue. So really covering all of the different aspects of major social, political, economic, technical, and for sure environmental challenges that we face today. And educated as a scientist and a chemical engineer, always been interested in the environmental aspects of our businesses, and in particular how we can improve those. For those of you who don't know the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, we're a coalition of approximately 80 member companies, supporters, strategic allies. And I would describe our uniqueness is in our global and full value chain representation. So we cover the full value chain from brand owners through major retailers, converters, petrochemical companies into waste management companies and recycling. And also in terms of our funding, which allows us to engage in developing, de-risking and demonstrating really large-scale projects. So that's our ambition, is to work in demonstrating holistic, pragmatic, scalable solutions to address plastic waste. So we pride ourselves in being a do tank more than a think tank. And we have projects today which are spanning activities from small-scale social enterprise projects through to really large-scale municipal collection, national-scale projects that we're working on. Scale-up also of new advanced sorting and recycling technologies, reverse vending, reuse business models. Also, we run a number of innovation incubator platforms in every region of the world and really trying to do our part in supporting the march towards a circular economy. So that's me. Let me hand back to you, Ruba.
Thank you, Martin, for summarizing what the Alliance to End Plastic Waste is setting out to accomplish. Our second panelist is Oli Kade, Head of Sustainability at 7 Clean Seas. Armed with a master's in environmental engineering, Oli's background is steeped in sustainability. He's worked with the likes of the European Environment Agency and Copenhagen Municipality. Oli, take it away.
Thank you, Ruba. It's a pleasure to be on this call. You kind of touched on my background, which is actually from a research perspective. But what I'm doing now is I'm a head of sustainability at a company called 7 Clean Seas. Now, traditionally, 7 Clean Seas is an ocean cleanup organization. We're based in Singapore and in Indonesia. And we have projects which really focus on the removal of plastic from our natural ecosystem and the plastic pollution in general. But that's not what I do. What I do is I work on the consultancy. So I scope out our services and liaise with our clients. And really what we're doing here is developing methodologies for understanding and accounting and measuring plastic footprint across the value chain. So whether we're talking about products or packaging, whether we're talking about facilities, operations, and actually helping provide a turnkey solution that really goes across the whole value chain, really jumping in the process for our clients, trying to understand where are the plastic hotspots, how can we reduce those immediate unnecessary plastic consumption, and then push this throughout the value chain. We're working with our suppliers to work towards more sustainable futures in packaging or in operations, etc. Now, I think that's really important because quite often when we talk about plastics, a lot of people don't actually understand where their footprint actually is. And as has been discussed by the previous panelists, this is a really complex issue. we have clients that have actually tried to reduce their plastic packaging to a certain extent, and they actually need that help pushing it further past that area where we no longer have low-hanging fruits, and we need to find fruitful reduction opportunities that will span over the next 5 years. And that's really the bulk of what we do here in the consultancy at 7 Clean Seas. As I said, I have a background in research, so I come from a lot of that perspective, really helping on the strategic sustainability transitions. So another thing that we also look at as well is how do we take this data that we've collected, understanding a footprint, to set visions, internal targets, and generate internal policies for companies to work towards that future that they want to achieve in sustainability. Now, I'm actually based here in Doha at the moment, so I'm going to apologize for my backdrop, but I'm actually working here on for the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy, working on a research project for the World Cup to see how much plastic's actually going to be consumed in the games themselves. So I think that really covers the bulk of what I do. The reason why I'm actually on this panel today is because of the experience I've had going into several organizations, looking at their packaging and understanding the data gaps and the direction that we actually want to take it. So it's a pleasure to speak to you all today, and yeah, excited for this thrilling conversation.
Thanks, Ollie. That sounds like a very cool project that you're working on right now. And now let's welcome our last panelist for our second fireside chat, which is who is Dr. Peter Nitschke, Director for Community Partnerships of Plastic Bank. Based in Germany, Peter and his team look into engaging schools and faith communities in Brazil, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Haiti to stop ocean plastic through recycling and driving behavioral change. Peter, the floor is yours.
Hello, Ruba and everybody. Thank you so much. It's a great privilege to be with you today. And yes, I'm based here in Germany, but I lived a long time in Asia. I've been in the Philippines for 20 years, mostly working in NGOs. And I joined Plastic Bank 5 years ago. During that time, Plastic Bank was a small startup. We were about 10 people in Canada, Haiti, and me alone in the Philippines. And now we have about 200 staff worldwide, and working in Brazil and in Egypt and in Indonesia. And our Indonesian country director was actually a panelist here 2 years ago. And so we have had a lot of growth recently. Last January, we had a milestone where we collected about our first billion bottles, and and that took us 7 years. And for the second billion, it will only take us 7 months. So you can see how we have grown. Our goal is to stop ocean plastic before it is getting into the ocean, and we are mostly working with informal collectors and small, medium recycling businesses on the ground to collect the plastic in coastal communities before it gets into the ocean. We have about 500 collection points. We work with about 20,000 collectors worldwide, and our product is what we call social plastic. It is a plastic that brings social, economic, and environmental impact by improving the life of their communities, which means in adding additional income to the people, helping them to get access to social services like bank accounts, like micro-insurance, like additional food. And so we sell our plastic to companies who have that same ambition, doing an impact in the communities where the plastic is collected. And some of those are global brands like SC Johnson's, like Henkel, also like CocaCola. And so it's great to see how we can be kind of a middleman between big brands and the communities on the ground to ensure that plastic is not ending up as waste, but as a raw material that feeds into a circular economy. And my job in Plastic Bank is to build this partnership with schools. And for this, we have a very exciting partnership also with the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, where we are working with schools in Bali, Indonesia, to develop environmental education programs that already bring behavior change and help people to be stewards of the plastic that they are using to make sure it's not ending up as waste as well. And then another exciting partnership that we have is with the Vatican. The Pope wrote this book Laudato Si, which is about caring for creation, caring for our society. And in the Philippines and in Brazil, we are working with Catholic churches where people can bring their plastic to the church and donate it to the church, and we collect it from there and bring it into the circular economy. So our goal is really to engage as many people as possible to create value out of plastic instead of ending it up at waste. And so I'm very excited here about this panel and to share what we're doing and also what we have learned in the meantime while we're doing this. Thank you so much. Back to you, Ruba.
Thank you for taking us through Plastic Bank's initiatives, Dr. Peter. With that, let's dive straight into our discussion. Let's have Martin Tickner, Dr. Peter, as well as Oli Kadi back. My first question for the panel is this. Current technologies to recycle plastics are not feasible nor lucrative for producers. On top of that, virgin plastics are still cheaply produced. What measures should be introduced along the packaging value chain to overcome these hurdles?
If you don't mind, could I jump on this one?
Go ahead, Oli.
Yeah, perfect. I think it's a really valid question that you've raised, and really there's 2 points that I want to touch on when it comes to the issues of the plastic recycling model as it stands. I think the first of which is understanding that nearly all material waste streams, plastics and on types of plastic products are technically recyclable, but there's a big difference between what is technically recyclable and what is actually feasibly recyclable. And that's something that I really wanted to focus attention on. We have a diverse set of products that we're generating. One of the reasons why PET bottles are so recyclable is because they're standard. We have PET bottles across a range of different brands, different products, and they are the same, and they are a vast quantity and volumes of this product. But when it comes to composite materials, for example, I think that if you talk about Tetra Pak as a perfect example, it's a composite which contains paper, plastic, aluminium. And then the issue that we have here is that although it in theory can be recycled, it's not in application because we need the correct infrastructure available to do so. And that's the case in Europe, where we have all of the infrastructure generated. And it's even worse when we're talking about the ASEAN region. Another point on this in terms of true recyclability is understanding the quality of plastics. We, as touched on in the previous fireside chat, we need to understand which recycling solutions are linear, i.e. are just going to prolong the life cycle of that plastic polymer until its ultimate fate, which would be landfill, incineration, etc. Or which recycling solutions are truly circular, that therefore replace the use of virgin material and therefore don't just reduce the amount of plastic being produced, but ultimately reduce the carbon emissions as well. And really, I think that another point I wanted to raise is that it's not just the diversity of products, but it's also the diversity of end-of-life solutions in different economies. On average, 30% of plastics in some of the developing economies can actually be recycled. But when we're talking about the developing economies, places like Indonesia, we have close to 0%. And that's a real issue that we're facing here. Not to mention the amount of leakage and pollution that occurs in these areas because the formal waste management system actually isn't available for many people. Now, the second issue with recycling on that point is, particularly when you're talking about how cheaply plastics are produced, is understanding that balance and the demand and cost of recycled plastics. So currently at the moment, recycling or recycled plastic is an unconstrained market, i.e. a buyer's market, because there isn't enough recycled content going into a lot of the products. Granted, there are cases where it is, and props to Coca-Cola for actually having 100% recycled in some of their bottles. But the issue being is that the costs are still high despite it being a buyer's market because of the processing costs of recycling industry. Now, that's where economic tools can come in. And that's one of the solutions I really wanted to talk about. Taxes and subsidies to rebalance the cost of virgin material compared to recycling is something that governments can implement. EPR schemes, which we'll touch upon later, is another useful tool to balance the economies. And also as well, what we do at 7 Clean Seas in terms of plastic credits that are used to funnel funding into the areas for collection or for recycling projects, which can cover a lot of these processing costs and drive the cost of recycled material down as well. So that's my piece on the topic, but I'll hand over to some of the other panelists.
Thank you, Ollie. Yeah, Martin, you look like you've got something to say.
But you're muted.
Sorry, but I'm on mute. Yeah, no, I'm unmuted. Yeah, so thanks. I mean, really excellent points, Oliver. I would add one point first and foremost in all of this, because we're very much focused on recycling, and all the discussion we've had so far has been on recycling, also mostly in the previous panel as well. So we shouldn't just forget the opportunity to also look at the reduction agenda, so reducing the unnecessary use of plastic and packaging, which is it's a real trade-off. I'll come back on that in a moment, but also the opportunity for reuse of products. But I think we've talked a lot about PET, and if we just stay with PET for a moment, yeah, PET for sure. Bottles are widely recycled in the world. I think we've heard that very clearly. If you look at best practices in the world, Norway, I think, is achieving a rate of 97%. So you clearly see that some things can be done. But in the previous fireside chat as well, we also had Mathias talking about the importance of design. And I think this is where technology comes in, and why I introduced myself saying this is an extraordinarily complex issue. Because we have the aspect of designing products and packaging, making them as easy to recycle as is possible. We have the opportunity to be able to reduce, reuse, use alternative materials, all lots of choices to be made. Then we have very many different technologies. So Oliver, you mentioned that as well, different technologies for reprocessing and ultimately end markets. And all of these things need to work together to optimize. So it's an extraordinarily challenging problem, but I take confidence in the fact that we have a solution. We've shown that PET can work, PET bottles. There are reasons for that, because indeed those bottles are simple, they're easily collected, they're easily reprocessed, and the result is that we have a solution here where the economics work, the technology works, and the recycling rates are continuously improving. To the point actually where the Alliance doesn't engage in PET projects typically, because we think that's largely solved, not completely solved, and of course there's more to be done. So the real challenge is, how do we translate that success to other applications, to other plastics? And that's where we're really looking across the suite of all those different levers that we have, looking to develop, fund, and demonstrate the technical and economic viable solutions. But they've got to be replicated quick, and they've got to be replicated on a huge scale. And certainly, to speak to a point that was before, retaining the highest value possible. So we talk about mechanical recycling, but mechanical recycling into garden furniture, or the example we had of railway sleepers before, paint buckets, paint piles. Yes, it is extending the life of the plastic, but it's not really true to the principle of the circular economy, which is retaining as much value as possible and as long as possible. So for sure, some applications are going to be much more difficult than others. So as we move on from PET to go into high-density polyethylene bottles, for example, probably also relatively easy, low-hanging fruit. But as you get really into those multi-material laminates that Oliver talked about, films for food preservation, for sachets, pouches, all these things, really quite complex. You know, plastic is not just plastic; it's a highly engineered solution and designed to meet complex challenges. So I think this is where we're really looking for technical solutions as well. So design for sure. So if we can simplify the design of products, if we can make them more suitable for recycling, is great. But in general, we have a question here of Also then in the recycling is ensuring plastics are kept segregated and clean. And that's done really well in the low labor cost regions, and in the high labor cost regions like Europe, like Japan, Singapore, for example, North America, consumer drop-off, reverse vending, high-tech sorting of household waste, those are the types of solutions that are required. And I would say those technologies are coming fast. I think Mathias talked about it previously, but if you look at sorting technologies in particular, that's really important. So to the extent we can't keep plastic segregated, if we can sort it, we have a chance to be able to mechanically recycle it to high-value applications. So there are sorting technologies out there, near-infrared object recognition, digital watermarks, very, very new project that the Alliance is strongly funding, chemical tracers. Processing technologies are evolving fast. And where mechanical recycling is not going to be able to provide the required quality, or at least not at an economic cost, then we also have the rapidly emerging chemical recycling processes, which will reproduce the original quality, and perhaps even more importantly, the diversity of the product range of a virgin plastic plant. So I think these technologies will enable high quality recyclates to be made. And once we can get the quality, and that's the key point I want to make, when we can get quality, the price will follow. So then there is a buyer's market, Oliver mentioned that, a buyer's market for recyclates. That means prices will be above virgin plastic. That will create investable opportunities for capital. It'll create contribution for the cost of collection. So I'm confident this is coming. But I think we do face a chicken and egg problem. And yeah, for example, why should a brand owner compromise on the design of their products to make something recyclable if it's not going to be recycled? But equally, why invest in recycling if products are not going to be made economically recyclable? So somebody has to move first. And similarly, when you look at the collection of the required quantity, if there's no market, people won't collect if they're not paid for it. But if the quality of used plastic and the quantity is not there, then people won't invest in recycling operations. So we have a lot of these types of chicken and eggs to work our way through. And that's why, and I just want to pick up on Oliver's point there about some sort of economic interventions. So,
Martin, in the interest of time, I'd like to just, jump onto the next question, if that's all right.
Maybe
thank you for
share one point.
Mm-hmm.
Just pretty quickly, and I want to have us look into the future. Right now, we have about 230 million tons of plastic waste annually, of which 90 million are mismanaged. In 2040, it will be 450 million tons of plastic waste, and 230 million will be mismanaged if we keep business as usual. And I think what Oliver and Martin said is really important things, and those things need to generate investment. Actually, when we said 14% of plastic are recycled annually, only 2% go in closed loop recycled. So the other thing is all downcycled. So it needs investments, actually. It needs a lot of investments. And those investments are about $800 billion until 2040. We could get up the recycling rates to 54%. So there is really something we can do. We just need to throw money at it and technology and having a political will to do it. Thank you.
I like
Peter,
that
I'd
point.
like to follow up on that question. When you say investment, who are the stakeholders that should be pumping in, these investment that you mentioned just now?
That would be probably government and private sector, I would think.
Okay,
and it could
great.
also be ADB, World Bank, all kinds of people who have an interest to do something.
Okay, great. Thank you, Peter. Ollie, you mentioned about extended producer responsibility earlier. In your opinion as well, and this question is open to the other panelists as well. Do you think that the EPR schemes are driving sustainable packaging?
That's a good question. To be frank, at the moment, I would say no. The reason why, obviously, EPR, I think, is a great thing. Shifting that responsibility for the packaging from the consumer to the producer or the user is a really important point. But really, I think the main issue is that we need to assess what are the underlying values of an EPR scheme. And I also, by the way, I'm generalizing here because EPR schemes do vary between regions. But one thing that I really want to point out is that a lot of the funding that goes into EPR is for collection, recycling, composting. And it's actually very important, particularly in places like Indonesia, where we have leakage rates of upwards or waste mismanagement upwards of 83%, which is phenomenal how bad that situation actually is. So there is a need for those EPR schemes that focus on the collection, the infrastructure, etc. But actually, if we look at the UK EPR scheme that they're introducing in 2023, I think that's a good point of actually where they're trying to change the underlying values of an EPR scheme. They're looking at modulated fees that reflect the criteria such as recyclability of a packaging, which then means that you get lower fees for more sustainable packaging, higher fees for more unsustainable packaging. Now, what that does is states that, hey, there's an economic benefit if you push to find sustainable solutions, if you go towards standardized sustainable packaging, which we already know are, for example, on a green list. But also, how can you go further to look at recycled content, how modulated fees can be used for this, or if we can look at compostability, really circular solutions for packaging should be at the center of an EPR scheme, particularly in the developed economies. Now, they're also looking at mandatory recycling labeling, which I think is really great because it gives that detailed information. But also you could go a step further and look at mandatory packaging reporting, which is something that obviously we see now in carbon. People are very transparent about their carbon footprint, but why don't we have the same for plastics? And on a final point on that, also making sure that EPR schemes disincentivize the export of waste, particularly to the developing economy, which is what we're seeing in a lot of the case, and that is causing a number of different problems. But I think the main thing is that the principles of this change in EPR that we're seeing, particularly in the UK, is that underlying solution, that underlying values of what do we want to incentivize. And I think EPR is a great thing, but we need to have solutions across the value chain. If we have that end-of-life solution in place, then great. But how do we then work upstream to find the packaging which fits the solution? It needs to work together and come together. And that's really, I think, where the EPR scheme should focus. You know, you can pump millions into PET and HDPE recycling infrastructure, but if all companies are using Tetra Pak, then the recycling rate isn't going to increase. So there needs to be that jigsaw interaction. And on that final point, EPR schemes, because of this, should not just be copy and paste around the world. They need to look at the local context, the market context, the end-of-life context, and then find the correct solutions there.
All right, thank you so much for that, Oli. Martin, Dr. Peter, do either one of you have anything to add on to what Oli has mentioned?
I would just add to that, Ruba, that indeed, exactly as Oli has said there, I think the clue is in the name extended producer responsibility. So a lot of people think about EPR as a financial mechanism, as a way of making the producer, shifting the burden of the payment for the cost of disposal of the products they put on the market. But actually, I think the opportunity to extend the responsibility of the producer, which typically today would end at the point of sale or at the point of consumer use, now it's taking into account the post-use phase as well. So a packaging designer, or a brand owner, or a retailer now has an incentive to look at the full life cycle and to optimize the design of their products, the supply chain they're using through that entire life cycle. So it brings into scope reduction in unnecessary packaging, reuse of articles, simplification of the design, optimal choice of materials. All of those become highly relevant. I think exactly as Oli said, then you're really able to drive the best choices at the front end, which will optimize the full value chain, the full life cycle. So large agreement to the point made.
Yeah. Actually, I also agree with what Oli said, especially about that EPRs need to be looking into the local context. Like Plastic Bank, we are working mostly with the informal sector, and especially in countries in Southeast Asia, you have a huge informal sector who has a significant contribution actually into the circular economy of Southeast Asian countries, sometimes even collecting more plastic than the formal waste management system does. And so the EPR can be could be a powerful tool for informal communities to become formalized and to have access not only to stable income, but also to other services like health insurance and other education and other services that will improve their life. And I think in that way, the EPR could be a big opportunity, but that needs to be considered once the EPRs are designed and are implemented, that for example, informal communities are having a voice and that they are being considered. Otherwise, it might defeat the purpose, really. And those people who live from collecting waste might be marginalized even more, and that needs to be prevented.
All right, great. Thank you, Peter. It looks like, unfortunately, due to technical issues, Ollie has sort of dropped off. So let's, conclude with the fireside chat, since we have only 10 minutes to wrap up this session, by moving on to the concluding question for all of the panelists. So let's bring back up Prof Visu, Tana Sullivan, Kirsten, as well as Mathias. All right, hi panelists. Nice to see you all up again. All right, so the concluding question for our session today is this. Is there really such a thing as sustainable packaging? Could there be a no packaging future that we're seeing, that we can see being practiced by brands such as Lush Cosmetics? We can start with Kirsten.
Thank you. Good question. I truly believe that a circular economy for plastic packaging is possible. We've seen it in Europe. We can get there, but it requires new thinking. It requires collaboration. I think it's mentioned a couple of times before, investment, compromises, but also I think a culture where it's okay to fail and to learn from each other. So yes, circular economy for packaging is definitely possible. And then we're talking about the short and the midterm. On the longer term, and that's on the horizon, I love to say yes to a package-free or package-less future, because we all know that the most sustainable package is no packaging at all. And one of the things that I've learned from young voices like Greta Thunberg, and I know there's Swedish people in the call, I probably don't pronounce it right, but we all know her. And she often refers to the fact that companies or older people like we talk about 2025, 2030, maybe 2050 if we talk about our targets. But she and the whole generation around her is basically halfway their lives by then. And I'm expecting, and the baby in my belly will be only a teenager by the time that we reached our goals within our current strategies. So we're actually talking about the future here. The future is definitely circular. So a big yes to a future with no packaging at all or package-less solutions, and something that we have to focus on for the longer term while fixing the short-term issues and creating a circular system for the packaging as we know it today. So that's my answer.
Thanks, Kirsten, and congratulations on the happy news. On to Prof Visu.
Okay, thank you, Ruba. To answer your first question, is there really a thing called sustainable packaging? I think yes, in future. I strongly believe that, and we should. It's a reality. Now, no packaging, that I don't believe. Okay? That example you're talking about, Lush Cosmetics, yes, it could be possible in certain sectors. Maybe no packaging could be in food sectors, certain part of it, like as I said, edible packaging. But completely forgetting no packaging, I don't think it's a solution. Okay? Especially as I said, today's definition of packaging, it moved from safety to safety plus hygiene. So in that scenario, no packaging is not an option in future. Now, I strongly believe the design innovations are important step to avoid unnecessary or nice to have packaging to move to a necessary packaging where need to have. Packaging is a necessity, so you have to have that. So the design solutions should be easy to use, which can be reusable, or sometimes it can be shareable, so you can use it multiple times, and compatible with recycling technology. So that is very important. You need to have a recycling technology, and the packaging has to go hand in hand. This is my comment. Thank you, Uma.
Thanks, Prof Visu. Next will be Tana. What's your take on the question?
I actually would just +1 to Professor Visu on his comment. Right, I don't see a world without packaging. And again, the issue was never the material itself; it was what we actually did with it. And so I think for me personally, what I'd like to see is yes, that we can actually build a circular model in a market as complex as Indonesia is, that has little waste management infrastructure, that has huge issues as it relates to hygiene, as it relates to affordability, because for us, economic progress is, fortunately and unfortunately, it trumps everything right now, including environmental concerns in this country, and so like many other emerging markets. So I think for us, it's about, I'm hopeful. I have a lot of confidence in the young companies and the young leaders out there who have some great solutions already and just need a little bit of support from a company like ours to turbocharge some of their solutions and scale it across this country. But I'm hopeful, and I have a lot of confidence in that. And I think in the meantime, we will still continue to find a way and just try things as they come along, and with the hopes that one day we'll be able to build, for example, our platform into a truly circular one.
Thank you for that, Tana. The next on our list here would be Ollie.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, actually, that you've raised. I would actually say that circular packaging, truly circular packaging solutions are sustainable, because actually if we think about meeting the needs of the future generation in that definition of sustainability, then I would say that is the case. But I would shift away from the question of is packaging inherently sustainable, or is there a sustainable packaging? Because again, it defeats the purpose of it's a sustainable packaging value chain, and it's a sustainable packaging economy. That's what we need to look at. And completing the loop is difficult, but we have solutions across the value chain, and we can't just put all our eggs in one basket. We need a diverse set of solutions that will allow us to do so, because ultimately we're sitting on a ticking time bomb, and full integration is not readily available. So we need rapid reduction now. And my final point is that although the circular economy, in my opinion, is the future, because of these issues, it's not an excuse to put all of our hopes in the recycling side of things. We really need to look at reduction immediately.
Thank you for concisely answering the question, Ollie. Next we have Martin.
Yeah, so I'm a +2 on Professor Visu and Tana there, but also echoing what Oliver said. So I think in terms of sustainable packaging, we have a huge opportunity to improve, to really drive for true circularity, eliminating excessive packaging, changing business models, looking at reusable packaging, designing for circularity. But I think in terms of could there be a no packaging future, I think we need to remember that the packaging is there for a reason. And it's there to protect the contents. And the contents are generally much more environmentally impactful than the packaging itself. So, for example, food packaging typically only represents 2% of the carbon footprint of the food that it's protecting. So well-engineered packaging is serving a purpose. And I think our improvement efforts here need to be guided by environmental science more than popular opinion. So we make sure that we don't trade one problem for another. We're really discerning about what we do, but ultimately we can improve hugely. I don't think there is a no packaging future.
Thank you, Martin. And last but not least, Dr. Peter, what are your thoughts on this question?
Thank you. It's difficult to be last because everybody gave already a very good answer. But I still will give my answer. And first of all, I think what everybody said, reducing packaging waste is very important. And the second one, for packaging to become sustainable, we may have to make sure it's not becoming waste. And I think we need to approach it from the mindset that whatever material went into this packaging has value. It has been raw material. It has been created out of valuable raw material, and we need to design it in a way that it can be again become raw material. And we need to set up the systems in place that will make sure it's not going to end up as waste and not going to end up in places where it should not be, like in the ocean. And we need the system in place to do that. And I think from our side as Plastic Bank, that is what we have committed to create value out of plastic, and then our growth has shown that this is possible, and we are excited with partners to work together on this, because I think that is what the planet needs, what humanity needs for us to survive. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Peter. On that note, dear panelists and audience, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Just to wrap up and to summarize, the key takeaways from today's discussion is that infrastructure and technologies are not quite there to solve the problem posed by plastic packaging, but strides are being made all over the world. And it's not the same, say, for example, in Europe versus in Asia. Innovative solutions are already in place when it comes to packaging, such as making them edible, such as what Prof Visu mentioned, and improved labeling features as well, such as laser, to do away with unnecessary layers of plastic. And as what do you call, Ollie mentioned, we have ERP and other economic tools that would boost our conversation, as well as what stakeholders, whether they're from the government side or from the private side, can implement in order to make innovative solutions when we're talking about the packaging in the value chain of packaging. And on that note, I'd like to again thank our right now it's 6, but earlier 7 wonderful panelists who took their time to join us today. I hope the audience found the session today as enlightening as I did. And do remember to join Sea of Solutions Session 3 tomorrow at 11 a.m. MYT and 10 a.m. IST on cities and urbanization towards less plastic leakage. Have a pleasant evening ahead, and goodbye.
See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.